Welcome to Velvet Echoes, the place where real stories live. Before we begin, hit that subscribe button so you never miss a story, and drop a comment below telling us what city you're watching from. We love seeing where our listeners are. Now settle in because this one stayed with me. She packed her bags on a Tuesday, not a Sunday, not the end of the month, not after some dramatic final argument with dishes thrown and doors slammed. A Tuesday. Nathaniel Holt came home from a 14-hour day at the firm to find her winter coat gone from the hook by the door, her reading glasses missing from the nightstand, and a single envelope on the kitchen counter with his name written in her careful, slanted handwriting. He didn't open it that night. He made himself a cup of tea, stood at the window, overlooking the Ottawa River, and told himself she'd be back by morning. She wasn't. That was 5 years ago. And for 5 years, Nathaniel had moved through his life the way you move through a house after a power outage, carefully, by memory, not quite trusting the shapes of things in the dark. He was 41 when he walked into Maison Dorée on a Wednesday evening in late October. There to meet a client for dinner. The restaurant was the kind of place where the tablecloths were always amber, and the tablecloths were always white, and the conversations were always kept just below the volume of the jazz quartet in the corner. He'd been there a dozen times. He knew the maître by name. He knew which table caught the draft from the kitchen door. He didn't know that Claire Beaumont was sitting at table 7. He saw her before she saw him. She was reading something on her phone, one elbow on the table, her dark hair pulled back the way she used to wear it on weekday evenings when she was tired, but not yet ready to admit it. She looked exactly like herself. That was the thing that hit him first. Not that she'd changed, but that she hadn't. 5 years, and she still sat like that, slightly tilted to the left, like she was listening for something just outside the frame of the conversation. And then the child beside her said something, and Claire laughed, and Nathaniel's feet stopped working. There were 2 of them. A boy and a girl, both small, both dark-haired, both eating what appeared to be bread rolls, with the focused determination of people who have been told they must finish their bread before the main course arrives. The boy had something on his chin. The girl was explaining something with her hands in a way that involved a great deal of wrist rotation. Nathaniel stood in the entrance of Maison Dorée and understood, with a clarity that felt almost physical, that the ground beneath him had just shifted in a way it was never going to shift back. He had done the math before he reached the table. They had been married for 3 years when everything fell apart, which was a polite way of saying when his mother, Margaret Holt, decided that Claire was not the woman her son should have chosen, and set about proving it with the particular patience of someone who has both the time and the resources to be thorough. Margaret had never said anything cruel about Claire directly. That wasn't her style. She had instead offered small observations, that Claire seemed overwhelmed at the firm's charity gala, that the new house still didn't feel quite settled, that Nathaniel seemed tired lately. Didn't he? And she had let those observations do their quiet, corrosive work. The actual collapse had come in the form of a photograph. Nathaniel had come home early from a conference in Montreal to find Claire's car in the driveway and a man's jacket on the front porch. He had stood there for a long time before going inside. Inside, Claire was in the kitchen. The man, a colleague from her architecture firm, as it turned out, who had driven her home after her car wouldn't start, and had left his jacket when he got a call and had to leave quickly, was long gone. But the story Margaret had been quietly building, for 18 months, had a place for that jacket. And Nathaniel, who was exhausted and already primed to believe that the distance he'd felt growing in his marriage was Claire's doing rather than his own, had fit the jacket into the story without asking a single question. He had asked Claire to leave. She hadn't argued. She hadn't cried. She had looked at him for a long moment with an expression he had never been able to fully decode, something between grief and resignation, like a person watching a building they love burn down and understanding that there is no point running toward it. And then she had said, very quietly, "All right, Nathaniel," and she had left. He had found out about the jacket 3 months later. A passing comment from a junior associate at Claire's firm who had no idea he was talking to the estranged husband. By that point, Margaret had assured Nathaniel that Claire had moved on, that she had been seen with someone else, that the right thing to do was to proceed with the divorce and close the chapter cleanly. He had believed her, because it was easier to believe her, because the alternative, that he had thrown away his marriage over a jacket on a porch, was not something he was prepared to sit with. He had filed them, he had moved forward in the particular way of men who are very good at their jobs and use that competence as a form of shelter. He had not in 5 years stopped thinking about her, Claire. She looked up from her phone, and her face went through several things very quickly. Surprise, something unreadable. Then a careful, practiced stillness that told him she had imagined this moment before, and had decided in advance what expression to wear. Nathaniel. Her voice was the same. He had forgotten how much that would matter. The boy looked up from his bread roll. The girl stopped rotating her wrists. "Hi," the boy said, with the blunt, evaluative courtesy of a 4-year-old who has been raised to greet adults but reserves final judgment. "Hi," Nathaniel said. "This is Oliver," Claire said. She had put her phone down. Her hands were flat on the tablecloth. "And this is Margot." Nathaniel looked at the two children. Oliver had Claire's coloring, but something around the jaw that Nathaniel had seen every morning in the mirror for 41 years. Margot had his grandmother's eyes. His grandmother on his father's side. The woman in the old photograph on the hallway shelf. The one with the gray eyes that tilted slightly upward at the outer corners. "How old are they?" he asked. He heard his own voice from a distance. Claire was quiet for a moment. "They'll be 5 in March." The math was not complicated. "Claire." His voice came out lower than he intended. "I know," she said, simply, like she had been waiting for this sentence for 5 years and had used the time to make peace with it. "Why didn't you? You had asked me to leave." She said it without accusation. That was somehow worse. "Your mother had made it very clear that any contact from me would be unwelcome. I had a paternity test done privately. I tried to reach you once through a mutual colleague and was told you were engaged to someone else." A small pause. "I didn't think you would want to know. I was never engaged to anyone else." Claire looked at him then, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd appeared at her table. Whatever she found in his face made something shift behind her eyes. "No," she said quietly. "I imagine you weren't." Oliver tapped Nathaniel's sleeve. "You have the same color tie as my fish," he announced. "Oliver," Claire said. "It's blue." Oliver clarified, in case there had been any ambiguity. "What's your fish's name?" Nathaniel asked. Oliver considered this with the gravity it deserved. "Captain Bubbles, that's an excellent name." "He came up with it himself," Margot said with the weary authority of a sister who has been managing her brother's reputation for some time. "He didn't make it to dinner with his client that night. He texted an apology, cited a family matter, and meant it in every possible sense of the word. He sat at table 7 with Claire and Oliver and Margot for 2.5 hours. He watched Oliver work his way through a bowl of pasta with the focused intensity of an engineer. He watched Margot explain to the waiter with great seriousness exactly how she felt about mushrooms and why. He watched Claire watch him with that careful, quiet attention she'd always had. The quality he'd fallen in love with before he'd had the language to name what he was feeling. He learned that Claire had moved to a neighborhood in Westboro, the kind of street, with big trees and uneven sidewalks and neighbors who knew each other's names. She was running her own small architecture firm now, just 3 people, working mostly on residential renovations and heritage restorations. She had a good life. He could see that. She had built something real and solid, and her own, in the 5 years since he had handed her an envelope and asked her to leave. He had not built anything in 5 years. He had expanded his firm and won cases, and had his name added to the letterhead, and moved into a condo with floor-to-ceiling windows and 0 photographs on the walls. When the children started to flag, Oliver listing sideways against Claire's arm, Margot's explanations becoming slower and more disjointed, Claire began the quiet, efficient process of gathering coats and mittens that he recognized from 1,000 small evenings that no longer existed. "I'd like to see them again," Nathaniel said. He kept his voice level. He was very good at level. "If that's something you'd consider." Claire looked at him for a long moment. Oliver was now fully asleep against her arm. Margot was examining a crayon she had apparently acquired during dinner from a source that remained unclear. "I'm not going to make this difficult," Claire said. "I never wanted to make it difficult. I just needed to know that you actually wanted to be here." A pause. "Not that someone told you to be here. Not that a lawyer told you it was required. That you wanted it." "I want it," Nathaniel said. He had never been less interested in sounding composed. "I've wanted it for 5 years. I just didn't know what I was wanting." He started with Saturday mornings. That was Claire's suggestion, and it was a good one. Not dramatic, not laden with expectation, not the kind of forced reconciliation that buckles under its own weight before it gets started. Just Saturday mornings at a park or a coffee shop or wherever the children wanted to go, which usually meant the Nature Museum because Margot had strong views about the dinosaur exhibit and felt they had not yet exhausted its possibilities. He learned things about his children in increments, the way you learn a new language, slowly, at first, with a lot of mistakes, and then suddenly in a rush where things start connecting. Oliver was afraid of the sound the smoke detector made when the battery was dying. Margot could not be reasoned with before 9 in the morning and did not apologize for this. Oliver had named every plant in Claire's kitchen and gave them weather reports. Margot had recently decided she was going to be an astronaut and a chef simultaneously, and was not interested in hearing about logistical obstacles. Nathaniel brought Oliver a blue fish for his birthday, a proper one, with a tank and a filter and gravel, that Oliver selected himself from the pet store with the seriousness of someone choosing floor tiles, and Oliver named Admiral in honor of the promotion he felt Captain Bubbles deserved. "Captain Bubbles is fine," Margot told Nathaniel. "He just doesn't want the fish to get a big ego. That's very considerate." "I know," she said. He called his mother. In November, he had been thinking about what to say for 3 weeks. In the end, he kept it short, because there was nothing to be gained by length. He told her he knew about the colleague and the jacket. He told her he knew she had intercepted Claire's attempt to contact him after the divorce. He told her he had twin children who were 4 years old, and that those 4 years were not something he was ever going to be able to get back, and that she had been a significant reason for that. Margaret said several things in response, none of which were apologies. She suggested that Claire had clearly orchestrated the situation. She suggested Nathaniel was being emotional. She suggested that a paternity test would be wise before he involved himself further. "I had one done," he said, independently. 3 weeks ago. He had, in fact. He had not needed it to know the truth. Margot's eyes had done that, but he had wanted documentation. He was a lawyer. Documentation was how he processed things. "Nathaniel, I was only ever trying to—" "I know what you were trying to do," he said. "I'm not asking for an explanation. I'm telling you what happened. What you decide to do with that is your business." He hung up. He sat in his condo with the floor-to-ceiling windows and the 0 photographs and listened to the silence for a while. Then he got up and ordered frames online, the kind with the simple, dark, wood edges, and started thinking about which photos he would print first. The legal conversation with Claire happened in December, at her kitchen table, over coffee with the children at school. He had brought his own lawyer's mind to it and then deliberately set it aside, because this was not a negotiation, and he didn't want to treat it like one. He wanted to be formally recognized as the children's father. He wanted joint custody, designed around the children's actual lives rather than a template. He was not going to ask for their last names to be changed. That had been Claire's choice to make when she made it, and the children were already Oliver and Margot Beaumont. And he was not going to upend their identity, because it was tidier for him. Claire looked at him over her coffee cup when he said that last part. "You've thought about this carefully," she said. "I've had some time." "So have I." She set down her cup. "I'm not interested in making this adversarial. They need their father. You're their father." "That's—" She paused. "That should have been the case from the beginning, and I'm sorry that my fear made it not the case." "Your fear was rational," he said, "given the information you had. Your anger was rational too," she said, "given the information you had." They sat with that for a moment. Two rational people who had been handed a completely false story and had each, in their different ways, tried to do the sensible thing with it. I owe you 5 years, he said. You can't pay back time, I know. I'd like to try anyway. It was Oliver who said it first, because Oliver had a habit of naming things directly, that adults spent enormous energy dancing around. They were at the Nature Museum in late February, standing in front of the Tyrannosaur skeleton that Margot had opinions about, and Oliver had been quiet for a while in the thoughtful way that meant something was percolating. Are you going to live with us? He asked Nathaniel. Oliver, Claire said from behind a brochure. I'm just asking, Oliver said, reasonably. Nathaniel crouched down to Oliver's level, which was something he'd started doing instinctively somewhere around their third Saturday. Not right now, he said, but I'm going to be around a lot. Is that okay? Oliver considered this. You could have the study, he offered. There's a couch. That's very generous. It has a window, Oliver added sweetly, closing the deal. Margot, without looking away from the Tyrannosaur, said, He's not going to sleep on the study couch, Oliver. I know, Oliver said. I was being polite. Nathaniel stood up and caught Claire's eye over the tops of their children's heads. She was trying not to smile and failing in the best possible way. He has a point about the window, she said. He didn't move into the study. He did, eventually, move into the house. But that happened in stages, the way most real things happen, and by the time it didn't feel like an event so much as a completion of something that had been slowly becoming true for months. What he remembered most later was not the day they signed anything or the conversation where they decided anything, or the moment he brought the last box through the front door. What he remembered was a Thursday evening in early spring when the light through the kitchen windows was the particular gold that only happened for about 20 minutes a day at that time of year. And Margot was explaining her astronized career plans. Astronaut chef had evolved astronaut chef architect, which she felt was more practical, and Oliver was giving Admiral Bubbles a detailed account of the day's events, and Claire was at the counter with her reading glasses on, and her coffee going cold, the way it always did when she got absorbed in something, and the whole house was full of noise and light, and the specific warm clutter of 4 people living in a space that had been shaped around them. Nathaniel stood in the kitchen doorway and understood something he had not understood at 41, that the life you want doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with the clarity of a verdict or the neatness of a signed document. It assembles itself quietly, in the ordinary hours, in the fish names and the cold coffee, and the revised career plans, in the Saturday mornings and the park trips, and the way his daughter's eyes caught the late light, in a way that reminded him of a photograph on a shelf he hadn't looked at in years. He had lost 5 years. He was not going to lose another Tuesday.